3 months ago, I was living the life I had always dreamed of. A beautiful wife, 2 amazing kids, a career that gave me respect, and a home that looked like something out of a magazine. Everything seemed perfect. Every morning, I woke up thinking I was the luckiest man alive. But today, everything is gone. My house has been taken, my family torn apart, my career destroyed, and all I'm left with is a single letter. A letter that tells me the life I built, the people I trusted, and even the story of who I am, was nothing but a carefully crafted lie. I keep asking myself, how can everything collapse so quickly? How can love turn into betrayal and stability into chaos? This letter, written in handwriting I recognize all too well, may hold the answers. But the truth it carries is darker than anything I ever imagined. Stay with me, because what's hidden inside this letter will not only change the way I see my past, it will make you question how well you really know the people closest to you. For most of my life, I believed I was living a story worth celebrating. I had a family that people envied, a wife who was not only beautiful but also my closest friend, and 2 children who gave meaning to every decision I made. My parents, though no longer alive, had raised me with values that shaped the man I became. Hard work, honesty, and loyalty were not just lessons in our home. They were the foundation of everything I stood for. Our house was more than just walls and a roof. It was a dream that took years of saving and sacrifice. Every corner of it held memories, birthdays filled with laughter, quiet Sunday mornings with the smell of pancakes, and late evenings when the children fell asleep on the couch while we watched movies. It was the picture of stability, the kind of life people scroll past on social media and think they've got it all. My career added to that, a sense of completeness. I wasn't the richest man in town, but I was respected. People trusted me. My colleagues knew me as someone who always delivered on his promises. I took pride in that, because in a world full of deception, being dependable felt like an achievement. Looking back now, I realize how blind I was. At the time, I didn't notice the cracks forming. Small things at first. My wife taking calls in another room, lowering her voice just as I entered. She started coming home later, brushing it off with excuses about clients or heavy workloads. I wanted to believe her. I chose to believe her. After all, when you love someone for years, suspicion feels like betrayal in itself. My children, in their innocent way, also noticed something was off. My son once asked me why Mum seemed upset all the time. My daughter, who used to draw bright and joyful pictures, began sketching darker images, families standing far apart, eyes filled with sadness. I laughed it off then, thinking it was just teenage moods. But deep down, I felt the chill of something I couldn't quite name. Still, I ignored the signs. I told myself every couple goes through phases, every family faces challenges. I worked harder, planned special evenings, even booked a short trip for us, hoping to reignite what felt like fading warmth. But instead of closeness, I was met with distance, smiles that didn't reach the eyes, conversations that ended before they began. Now, standing on the other side of that perfect picture, I can see it clearly. The life I thought was unshakable was already cracking beneath the surface. And maybe, just maybe, I was too blinded by comfort to notice. I'm telling you all this not because I want pity, but because I know many of you in the Mr. Mitchel family understand. You've lived through those moments when everything looks fine from the outside, but inside your heart whispers that something is wrong. Sometimes it's easier to stay silent, to pretend everything is okay, until the truth shatters that illusion for you. That's why I share my story here with you, because sometimes strangers who listen become closer than the people who live under the same roof. You, my Mr.Mitchel family, are my strength as I relive the details of what happened. At that time, though, I believed I was still safe. I believed my family was strong, that loyalty could withstand anything. I didn't know that betrayal had already taken root in my own home, or that the people I trusted most were quietly holding secrets that would tear everything apart. If only I had listened to the silence between words. If only I had questioned the late-night calls, the hidden receipts, the moments of sudden coldness. Maybe I would have been prepared. But love makes us blind, and trust makes us vulnerable. And so I continued with my life, unaware that everything I valued was about to collapse, leaving me with nothing but questions, and a letter that would reveal truths I was never meant to know. It all began with a single envelope. The morning was quiet, the kind where the world feels normal. Coffee brewing in the kitchen, sunlight cutting through the blinds. But when the doorbell rang and I opened the door to find a man in a dark suit holding a thick envelope, I didn't realize he was about to hand me the death sentence for the life I thought was mine. Inside were divorce papers. Not just divorce papers, but accusations so twisted, so false, that I had to sit down because my knees gave way beneath me. According to these documents, I was not just a husband. I was a liar, a gambling addict, a thief, a danger to my own family. I couldn't believe what I was reading. My wife, the woman I had shared 18 years of my life with, had claimed I had been hiding debts, forging accounts, even stealing money from my work. There were bank statements, casino receipts, and witness testimonies. All of it painted me as a man I didn't even recognize. At first, I thought it was some kind of sick joke, but when I looked at the signature at the bottom, my wife's signature, my heart froze. The woman I had trusted more than anyone had become my greatest accuser. I rushed to confront her that evening. She didn't deny it. In fact, she barely looked at me as she packed her suitcase, clothes folded neatly as if she were preparing for a vacation instead of the destruction of our family. "How could you do this?" I asked, my voice breaking. She didn't even flinch. "I know what you've done," she said coldly. "What I've done?" I shouted. "None of this is true. You know I've never gambled a day in my life." She finally turned to me, her eyes so unfamiliar it felt like I was staring into the face of a stranger. "The evidence doesn't lie. Maybe you're too far gone to even admit it." That night, my home, the one filled with years of love, laughter, and memories, became a battlefield. She took the children and left. Their eyes were confused, afraid. My daughter clutched her sketchbook to her chest like a shield. My son refused to look at me. The silence they carried out the door cut deeper than any words could. The days that followed were a blur of courtrooms and accusations. I sat in front of a judge while my wife's lawyer tore apart the very core of who I was. They waved papers I had never seen before. Bank withdrawals I never made. Casino slips with my signature, but not my hand. Witnesses swore they saw me betting, borrowing, spiraling. I wanted to scream, to tear those lies apart, but the truth is, lies are louder in a courtroom. Every time I tried to defend myself, it sounded like excuses. Every time I swore I was innocent, they shook their heads like I was just another addict in denial. And the worst part? My wife never looked at me, not once. She sat there, calm, her face a mask of quiet. Victory. When the judge ruled in her favor, granting her the house, custody of the children, and nearly everything I had worked for, I felt something inside me shatter. Outside the courthouse, I followed her into the cold air, desperate for one last chance. She turned to me, and for the first time in weeks, she smiled. But it wasn't the smile I remembered. It was sharp, cruel, like a knife pressed against my throat. "You'll never see the kids again," she whispered. "I'm moving them away, and you don't have the money to stop me anymore." Those words still echo in my mind. In that moment, I realized this wasn't just a marriage falling apart. It was something darker, something planned. And I ask you, my Mr.Mitchel family, what would you believe if this happened to you? Would you trust the evidence staring you in the face, or would you trust the person you thought you knew better than anyone? Let me know in the comments, because even today, I still wrestle with that question. What I didn't know then was that this betrayal was only the beginning. My fall wasn't complete yet. There was still further to drop, deeper to sink, before I would find the one thing that could finally explain why my life had been destroyed. When the gavel came down in that courtroom, it wasn't just a ruling. It was the sound of my life collapsing. The judge's words were final. My wife would keep the house, full custody of the kids, and most of our assets. I was left with nothing but supervised visits and a reputation ruined by lies. Walking out of that courthouse, I felt like a ghost. People glanced at me the way you look at someone you used to admire, but now pity. The man who once stood proud, respected in his career and loved by his family, had been reduced to a headline no one would read, but everyone would whisper about: another gambler who lost it all. The home I had worked so hard for, the one filled with birthday candles, Christmas mornings, and laughter echoing through the halls, no longer belonged to me. I passed by it one last time before my wife moved the children away. Lights glowed from inside, but I was no longer welcome there. It wasn't just a house I lost. It was the soul of everything I thought I had built. And my children. God, the hardest part was the children. My son wouldn't even look at me when I tried to explain. My daughter's drawings, once filled with bright colors, had turned into shadows and broken figures. They believed the lies. They had to, because when the whole world presents a version of you that you can't disprove, even the people who love you most start to doubt. As for my career, it was gone overnight. My clients didn't want to be associated with a man accused of fraud and gambling. My license was suspended pending investigation. The phone calls stopped. The respect vanished. Years of building trust, all undone with a few forged papers and the right accusations. I remember one night in particular. I was sitting on the floor of a nearly empty apartment, staring at the ceiling. The silence was so heavy, it felt like it could crush me. The only sound was the distant hum of traffic outside, a reminder that life was moving on for everyone else while mine had frozen in ruins. I hadn't eaten that day. I hadn't spoken to anyone. I just lay there, wondering how a man could go from having everything to having nothing in the span of weeks. I thought about giving up. I thought about the easy way out, but then I remembered the faces of my children. Even if they didn't believe me now, even if they saw me as a stranger, I couldn't abandon them. Somewhere in the middle of my despair, I knew I had to fight, but I didn't know how. I didn't know where to begin. And that's when I turned to you, my Mr.Mitchel family. Because when the people closest to you turn their backs, sometimes it's the strangers who listen, the ones who hear your story without judgment, who give you the strength to stand up again. So let me ask you, if you were in my place, stripped of your home, your children, your career, and even your identity, what would you do when the world turns against you? Would you fight back? Would you run? Or would you collapse under the weight of it all? At that moment, I was still too broken to answer that question myself. All I knew was that I had hit rock bottom. And the thing about rock bottom is that sometimes it's the only solid ground left to push yourself up from. What I couldn't see yet was that the very thing meant to destroy me would lead me back to the truth. A truth buried deep in the past, hidden in a place I never expected. And when I found it, everything I thought I knew about my life would change forever. After the court rulings and the endless nights in that empty apartment, I knew I couldn't stay in the city any longer. Everywhere I turned was a reminder of what I'd lost. My old office building with its locked doors, the park where I used to watch my kids play, the restaurants where my wife and I had once laughed like teenagers. It was all poison now, shadows of a life that didn't belong to me anymore. So, with nothing left, I packed what little I owned into the trunk of my car and drove for hours until I reached the only place that still felt like it might hold a piece of me. My childhood home. The house had been sitting empty since my mother passed away 2 years earlier. It was a small, weathered place on a quiet street, far removed from the city's chaos. The paint was peeling, the shutters crooked, but the moment I stepped out of the car, I smelled the faint scent of lilacs, the same flowers my mother used to plant every spring. For a moment, I almost expected to see her on the porch, waving me inside. Unlocking the front door felt like stepping back in time. The furniture was still in its place. Her reading glasses lay on the side table as if she had just stepped away for a moment. Even her favorite book sat open on the armrest of her chair. It was like walking into a frozen memory, one that hadn't. I realized she was gone. I wandered from room to room, touching the walls, the shelves, the little details that had defined my childhood. Every corner whispered with memories. The kitchen still smelled faintly of coffee and cinnamon, a reminder of the mornings she'd wake me before school. My old bedroom had posters peeling from the walls, relics of a boy who once believed life was simple and safe. I should have felt comfort. Instead, I felt a growing weight in my chest. My mother had always seemed so ordinary, a librarian who worked hard to give me everything she could. But as I stood in her house, broken and lost, I couldn't shake the feeling that she had left me more than just a roof and some furniture. The thought grew stronger as I explored the basement. Boxes were stacked in uneven towers, full of things she had kept over the decades, Christmas decorations, old photographs, even my childhood school projects. I sat on the cold concrete floor and opened one box after another, sifting through the fragments of her life. At first it was comforting. Old family albums reminded me of birthdays and holidays we had celebrated together. Letters she had saved revealed how deeply she cared for the people in her life. But then, something shifted. In the far corner of the basement, behind the old furnace, I noticed the dust on the floor looked disturbed. There were faint scratch marks on the concrete, like something heavy had been moved recently, though the house had been untouched since her funeral. My heart began to pound. I pushed the furnace slightly forward, my hands trembling. That's when I saw it. A small section of the wall that didn't look quite right. The paint was different, the concrete cleaner, and in the middle of that wall, half hidden by shadow, was a metal square, the outline of a safe. For a long moment, I just stared at it. My mother, the quiet librarian, had kept a secret vault in our basement. Why? What could possibly be inside? I ran my fingers over the cold metal. It was old but sturdy, with a combination lock that felt worn from use. Whoever had opened this safe had done it many times. But I had never once seen my mother go near this wall. She had never even mentioned it. Questions swirled in my mind. Why hide a safe behind a furnace? Why keep it secret from me, her only son? And why did I feel, deep down, that whatever was inside was meant for me to find, but only when the time was right? The despair I had carried for months was suddenly replaced with something else: suspense, curiosity, even fear. For the first time since losing everything, I felt a spark of purpose. I didn't know it yet, but opening that safe would not just explain why my life had fallen apart. It would rewrite everything I thought I knew about my past, my family, and even myself. For hours, I stared at the safe, my fingers tracing the cold steel, my mind racing with possibilities. Jewelry, old savings, important documents, or was it just my imagination, turning dust and metal into something bigger than it was? The combination dial mocked me, a circle of endless numbers. I didn't know where to start, but then a memory surfaced. Every year on my birthday, my mother would call me at exactly the same time, down to the minute. She said it was because it was the moment I entered the world. What if... Hands shaking, I dialed my birthday. Month, day, year. For a second, nothing happened. Then, with a click so soft it felt like a whisper from the past, the door of the safe creaked open. Inside was not what I expected. It wasn't jewelry, and it wasn't just paperwork. It was everything. Stacks of cash, bundled neatly in rubber bands, old, yellowed bills mixed with crisp new ones. I pulled them out with trembling hands, counting until I couldn't any more. Hundreds of thousands of dollars, maybe more. My mother, a librarian, had left behind a fortune. But the money was only the beginning. Beneath it, wrapped in worn envelopes, were documents, driver's licenses, passports, birth certificates, dozens of them, all with different names, but the same face. My mother's face. I felt dizzy. Each identity was from a different state, some from decades ago. Maria Santos, Catherine Walsh, Isabella Reyes. Every photo was her, but not her. Younger, older, smiling, stern. My mother, the woman I thought lived a quiet, simple life, had been living under multiple names for years. And then, at the bottom, I found the envelope with my name on it, my real name. I sat on the concrete floor, my heart pounding so loud it drowned out the silence. Slowly, carefully, I opened it. Inside were several pages written in her familiar, careful handwriting. My dearest son, if you're reading this, then they've found you, and I'm no longer here to protect you. The life you've lived, the name you've carried, none of it has been real. I stopped breathing. My eyes darted across the page, desperate to take in the words. Your father did not die in an accident, as I told you. His real name was not Morrison, but Castellano. He was murdered by men tied to organized crime. I was supposed to die with him, but I ran. I took you, and I testified against them. The government put us in witness protection. I became someone new, and so did you. Everything you remember about your childhood was built on lies designed to keep you alive. The words blurred as tears filled my eyes. My mother, my gentle, quiet mother, had been living in hiding, carrying a secret that had defined both our lives. I read on, my hands trembling. The money in this safe is what remains of the government settlement, along with what I managed to save. But it is not just money they want. For years, I feared they would come looking for us. And now, I know they have. Fletcher, your wife was not just pulling away from you. She was manipulated. The people destroyed your father found her, convinced her you were dangerous, and used her to break you. Everything you lost was orchestrated to flush you out, to bring you back here, to this house, where they believed I might have left evidence behind. I dropped the paper, my stomach twisting. My wife's betrayal, The forged documents, the false accusations, none of it was random. It was part of something bigger, something that had started long before I was even old enough to understand. I picked up the last page. At the bottom, written in red ink, was a phone number. Call Marshal Theodore Vance with the U.S. Marshals. Tell him you are Vincent Castellano's son. He has been waiting for this day. And remember, my son, sometimes the worst thing that happens to you leads you exactly where you need to be. I pressed the letter to my chest, tears streaming down my face. My entire life, my identity, my family, even my marriage, had been built on a secret I was never supposed to know. Everything I believed about myself was a lie. But in that moment, for the first time since I lost everything, I felt something new. Clarity. I wasn't just a man betrayed by his wife or ruined by lies. I was part of a story much larger than my own, and the truth was only beginning to unfold. I must have sat on that cold basement floor for hours, staring at the open safe, my mother's letter trembling in my hands. The money, the documents, the truth, all of it was overwhelming. But one detail burned into my mind more than anything else. The phone number at the bottom of that page. For days I wrestled with what to do. Part of me wanted to forget I had ever seen it, close the safe, lock it again, and pretend none of this was real. Maybe, if I ignored it, I could find some other way to rebuild my life. But every time I looked in the mirror, I saw the hollow eyes of a man who had already lost everything. What more was there to fear? Finally, with shaking hands, I dialed the number. It rang only once before a firm voice answered. "Vance," I swallowed hard. "My name is Fletcher M. Orison, but I think my real name is Fletcher Castellano. My mother left me your number." There was a long silence on the other end. Then the man exhaled sharply, like he had been holding his breath for decades. "Son, I've been waiting for this call since your mother died. Where are you right now?" Within hours, a car pulled up outside my mother's house. 3 men stepped out, federal agents. At their head was Marshal Theodore Vance, tall, grey-haired, and carrying the weight of a man who had seen too much. Inside, he examined the safe with a grim expression. "Your mother was one of the bravest people I ever worked with," he said quietly. "She testified when others stayed silent, and she knew someday they'd come looking for her son. She prepared you for this moment." As they catalogued the documents, Vance explained what I had been too blind to see. The same organization that murdered my father had never stopped hunting the witnesses who testified against them. Over the years, they had learned to destroy lives in quieter ways, not with bullets, but with lies, financial ruin, false accusations, families torn apart. "That's what they did to you," Vance said, meeting my eyes. "They found your wife. They fed her lies, manipulated her with forged evidence, and used her to dismantle everything you had. It's a playbook they've run before." I felt sick. The woman I loved, the mother of my children, had been nothing more than a pawn in a decades-old war I never knew I was part of. Vance placed a steady hand on my shoulder. "You're not alone anymore. And we're not going to let them finish what they started." It was a strange moment, realizing that the person I thought was my enemy, the government that had forced my family into hiding decades earlier, was now the only force that could save me. The same people who had once erased my identity were the ones offering to protect it. But protection came at a price. Vance warned me that by opening the safe, I had painted a target on my back. "They'll know you've found it," he said. "And they won't stop until they've silenced you, or until we stop them first." The stakes had changed. This was no longer about saving my marriage or even clearing my name. This was about survival, mine and my children's. And for the first time, I wasn't just fighting to prove my innocence. I was fighting to finish what my mother had started. The following weeks passed like a storm. Vance and his team dug through the documents my mother had left behind, cross-checking them with files locked away in government archives. What they uncovered was bigger than I ever imagined. Names, dates, bank transfers, connections between politicians, businessmen, and the same crime family that had haunted my bloodline for decades. And every thread led back to the same conclusion. I had been targeted, not because of who I was, but because of who my father had been, and because my mother had been brave enough to stand against them. One night, Vance called me into the kitchen, his face more serious than usual. "They know you've opened the safe," he said. "They've been watching. We've intercepted messages. They're planning to move against you." My stomach turned to ice. "What does that mean?" "It means we set the trap before they do." The plan was simple but dangerous. Bait them with what they wanted most, the documents, and catch them in the act. For once, I would no longer be the hunted. I would be the one standing in the light of truth, while they were dragged from the shadows. The confrontation came sooner than I expected. I was standing in my mother's living room, the safe open behind me, when the sound of a door breaking echoed through the house. Figures in black poured in, their footsteps heavy on the old wooden floor. My heart pounded, but I forced myself to stand my ground. "Looking for this?" I held up one of the envelopes, my voice steady despite the fear crawling in my chest. They froze, just long enough for floodlights to blaze through the windows. Federal agents burst in, guns raised, shouts filling the air. In seconds, the house erupted into chaos. The men who had come for me dropped their weapons, faces pale under the glare. They hadn't expected resistance. They hadn't expected Vance. When the dust settled, handcuffs clicked into place. Years of corruption and cruelty were dragged out of my home, one criminal at a time. But the confrontation wasn't just with them. Hours later, I sat across from my wife in a federal interview room. She looked smaller than I remembered, her eyes red from tears. Vance had shown her the evidence, the recordings, the payments, the manipulation. For the first time, she realized she hadn't been protecting her children from me. She had been helping strangers destroy us. "I didn't know," she whispered, her voice cracking. "They told me you were dangerous. They showed me proof. I thought I was saving our kids." I wanted to hate her. I wanted to scream at her for the pain she had caused. But all I saw was a woman who had been lied to, just like me. We were both victims of the same darkness. My children entered the room soon after. My son's eyes searched mine, uncertain, while my daughter clutched my hand tightly. "Dad," she whispered, "is it really over?" I pulled them close, my voice breaking. "It's not over yet, but we're together again, and that means we've already won." For the first time in months, hope returned. Not because everything was fixed, but because the truth had finally broken through the lies. Justice wasn't just a word in a courtroom anymore. It was something I could see, touch, and hold in the faces of my children. The people who had hunted us for decades were behind bars. The name they tried to bury, Castellano, had risen again, not in shame, but in strength. And I knew, standing in that moment, that I wasn't just finishing my mother's fight. I was reclaiming my family's future. When I look back now, it feels almost impossible to believe how far I've come in just a few months. From losing my home, my career, and even the trust of my children, to uncovering the truth that had been buried for decades, it feels like I've lived two different lives in one lifetime. There are nights when I still wake up in a cold sweat, hearing the judge's gavel, seeing the look in my wife's eyes when she thought I was a stranger. But then I remind myself of the basement, the safe, and my mother's handwriting. And I realize that none of it was wasted. Every loss led me to the truth I was meant to find. Losing everything gave me the strength to dig deeper, to ask questions I never would have dared to ask before. If my life had remained comfortable, I never would have uncovered who I really was, or the legacy my mother fought so hard to protect. And maybe that's the lesson in all of this. Sometimes the worst tragedies don't destroy us. They redirect us. They strip away the illusions, the lies, the comfort zones, and force us onto the path we were meant to walk all along. I once thought my story was about betrayal, about how easily a life can be ruined by lies. But now I see it's about something else entirely: resilience. About standing back up when the world has knocked you down and realizing that strength doesn't come from what you've kept, but from what you've survived. I'll never forget the pain. I'll never forget the emptiness of losing my children, my reputation, my place in the world. But I'll also never forget what my mother wrote. Sometimes the worst thing that happens to you leads you exactly where you need to be. And now, standing on the other side of it, I know she was right. This was my story. But I know I'm not the only one who's been through pain, betrayal, or loss. Many of you in the Mr.Mitchel family have faced struggles of your own. So, many of you have carried secrets. Some of you have been hurt by the people you trusted most, and some of you have had to rebuild your lives from the ground up. And that's why I share these stories here, because together we can remind each other that even in the darkest times, there's always a way forward. Sometimes the people closest to us fail us. Sometimes life feels like it's tearing everything away. But when we share, when we listen, when we stand side by side, we realize we're not alone. I want this channel, Mr.Mitchel Family, to be more than just a place for stories. I want it to be a community where every story, every comment, every lesson makes us stronger. So if this story touched your heart, if it made you think about your own journey, then please subscribe to Mr.Mitchel Family and hit that bell icon. Every subscriber gives me the strength to keep telling stories that matter, stories that heal, stories that remind us that resilience is possible. And I want to hear from you. Tell me in the comments below, what's the hardest truth you ever had to face, and how did it change you? Your words might inspire someone else who's listening tonight, someone who needs hope just as much as I once did. Thank you for being here. Thank you for being part of this family. Together, we'll keep moving forward.